I'm not going to give a long introduction because I know the press release and the website tells you all about Angela Valenzuela, but she did grow up in San Angelo, went to public schools. Her daughters have grown up in public schools. She made her way from college in San Angelo to a master's at UT, a PhD at Stanford. And while she was our colleague here in the sociology department, her very first book, which is very rare, won the National Book Award for Education Research, Subtractive Schooling. And it was a long-term study of what we're doing to really reduce the possibilities that children will thrive if we don't really connect to them and their cultures. So if you haven't read Subtractive Schooling, you should, and if you're my student, you will. So as we think about Angela's presence with us and the work that she's now doing at UT Austin and in the Austin community with the Austin schools, and nationally as head of the national organization that shapes the Latino education research community's agenda nationally, both for activism and for scholarship. I was advised that maybe I could just quote from our letter of invitation that went out to her this summer to give you a sense of why she is our keynote speaker. Your deep understanding of what it means to educate all children and who all children are is the perfect message for this gathering. As you know by the most recent census figures, Houston has been deemed the nation's most diverse city. The children in our schools come from everywhere in the world, and they represent the coming face of the nation's children. Yet, as you're all too well aware, the child poverty rate in Texas remains among the nation's highest, and that's even with our big current oil boom. And it's the children in poverty, especially Latino, African American, second language learners, and recent immigrants, who are most likely to be among the 100,000 kids lost from Texas high schools every year. Your strong message for academically rich, equitable schooling for all children could not be more timely from our community or more consistent with the mission that we have here at Rice that we hope our students will fulfill as they go out to be teachers. And the new work that you're doing, which I just know a little bit about, so I hope she'll go in more detail, to empower communities to develop rich programs of learning and assessment. We hope will lay the important foundation for our students who are going to be teachers and for all the teachers who are working so hard on behalf of the schools. So I am proud to introduce Angela Valenzuela.
Thank you, Linda. It's so nice to be here among so many people that I know, a lot of friends, people from the past, colleagues, fellow researchers. It is such an honor, and it's especially an honor to be here for your 50th anniversary. That's major. That's a really big deal. I don't take that lightly at all. I know that this is an important commemorative event, that there's a lot of work, a big investment, a long history that goes into teacher preparation that's very involved in our community and that I was a part of when I was here at Rice University. So we find ourselves today looking forward to the next 50 years of the teacher education program at Rice University. What I'm going to talk today about is some of the work that we're doing and how it has implications for teacher preparation and I think for the next 50 years of the teacher education program here at Rice as well. Of course, you will draw the inferences and connections that are appropriate to your context here. And so what I want to do is first talk about, in general, what we accomplish as teachers and as teachers of teachers, and then move toward a conversation of some of the work that we're doing at the national level and then at the local level. And at the local level, there's a couple of parts to it. One part has to do with a Saturday Academy that we're opening up hopefully this fall at the MIS Barrientos Mexican American Center. And then the other part of it has to do with policy work that I and others are involved in that has bearing for Houston and for the state. So when we think about teacher preparation and the reason why so many of us are committed to it, what we have to really put our heads around and grasp is that it provides access to every other profession. I mean, really think about that. It provides access to every other profession. And so it's no small thing that we do when we commit our lives and our careers to teacher preparation. And teacher preparation accomplishes this at the same time that it shapes professions, right? So we're not only imparting skills and knowledge, but at its best, at our best, we're also imbuing that critical consciousness of which the late Brazilian educator Paulo Freire spoke. Education must help children not to just read the word, which is a technical concept, a technical approach to literacy, but it has to help children read the world, which is a critical approach to literacy. And students, if you have not read Paulo Freire, you should not get a degree without reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed. How many of you have read Paulo Freire? Now everybody has, right? But it really is important that you read Paulo Freire. He's the one who talks about the importance of reading not just the word, but the world. Very influential to American educators and beyond. So when we're talking about reading the world, we're talking about the antithesis of just existing and finding our place in society. Ideally, higher education in general helps us not just to be innovative and creative and to value diversity, borrowing from Linda McNeil, treating diversity like an accessory, but rather to live the world as a critically conscious, politically aware, and community-engaged educator. Culture can be bought. It can be purchased, right? Language can be bought. It can be purchased. There's culture in abundance to be had. It was referenced was it Jennifer or Dr. McNeil who talked about the diversity of Houston. There's a lot of culture to be had, and that's a really great thing. And it's a thing to celebrate. But what I want to talk today about is something that is more purposeful and social justice oriented in terms of how education connects to diversity and diverse needs and interests. So we need to be, as teacher educators, about preparing the next generation in this moral vision with a social justice orientation that imbues children and their families and communities with a real knowledge, a deep knowledge of their rights and their responsibilities, not only to society as it is, but also to the world as it should be. But teachers can't do it all, and they shouldn't have to, not only because the needs are so great, but also because teachers themselves are under relentless attack, as we know, by the neoliberal right that seeks to corporatize, privatize, and marketize all things education. It's no longer heresy to say that, right? It used to be out there, over the top, to make those kinds of statements. And it's no longer heresy to say that. What we know is that there is an aggressive agenda, and it depends on the demonization of teachers and schools. And we know that the tests, the high-stakes testing that children are exposed to and they have to take as part of their educational experience is the handmaiden to this agenda, this privatization, this corporatization agenda. When I'm talking about high stakes, I'm referring to consequences to children, to retain them in grade or to promote them in grade or to not allow them to graduate. I'm also talking about consequences to schools, to rate schools as failures or successes. And the problem that with that is that this system, as you know, incentivizes cheating and gaming and teaching to the test and testing to the test. All kinds of perverse incentives are created by this system, and I'll come back to this later. The late Jean Anyon, in her book Radical Possibilities, speaks to our role as a polity to shape housing, living wage, environmental, air, and quality policies. Teachers get blamed unfairly for factors that affect schooling outcomes that are far outside of their control. And that needs to end. We need to stop blaming teachers for things that are beyond their control. Everyone in this room needs to be part of that constituency or to become a constituency that takes on these issues at local, state, and national levels, and to study and examine and be part of the policy conversations and debates and discussions wherever they are held at local, state, or national levels. That requires a kind of reskilling that we don't typically have, not even as communities. And that helps explain why we are in the situation that we are in. We're the deer in the headlights, right? Just looking at this aggressive agenda come over us, when really the government we have is the government we deserve, right? The government we have is the government of our own creation, largely by our inaction, right? And there's a lot to be accomplished through our action. So you might ask, what is teachers' work for the next 50 years? What is their purview? To answer this question, I'll draw from a manuscript that is currently under review with myself as lead editor of a volume that is getting reviewed by Teachers College Press, that grows out of the national level interest that and work that Dr. McNeil mentioned. And what this work is the work of scholars and advocates across the country. We call ourselves the National Latino Education Research and Policy Project, NLERAP, and we're a grow your own teacher education pipeline. That's what we've been trying to accomplish in 5 cities and 5 states. We are located in Sacramento, California, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois, New York, and Dallas, Texas. I can talk about that later, perhaps in Q&A, but it's very important work that we're doing at the national level. It's a partnership model. It involves partnerships between schools and districts, universities, and grassroots community-based organizations. And the idea is to grow our own Latino teachers with the idea that we can stem the tide of teachers that just come into our schools, unfortunately, really more as a stepping stone to another career, but not as a destination, not because they're really interested in addressing equity. We have to also end that. It's really awful to have any system that would be predatory like that, and it would be fine. It would be okay for these teachers to build their careers on the backs of failure and poverty. So what we're trying to accomplish is to root, and at each site where we're located, is to root this initiative in the soil. And with some success, but we're still at work. We've gotten Kellogg and Ford Foundation grants, and now we have this curriculum, and the curriculum is for higher education teacher preparation, and it will be definitely taught in our schools, and we hope in our universities, and we hope in many other places. In this curriculum, we give a lot of importance to roots. So at each site where we're located, we're very much connected to, as I mentioned, community-based grassroots organizations. That is really important in any model of reform, the grassroots. And it's important because they are the primary stakeholders of the reform, right? They're the ones that are going to be affected by the policies and the practices that we advance. They're also the ones that are going to contribute to the long-term sustainability of these reforms. And so roots are very important from a reform perspective, but they're also important in terms of our identities and our political identities and how we're connected to each other in ways that, that over time become cumulative, because there's trusting relationships that work, and we're able to exchange resources across different sectors, and with trust we're able to have conversations that end up finding their ways into practices and policies that are meaningful to children, that are ultimately transformative. And roots are also important because they serve as metaphors for memory. Memory is important because if we think about Latinos and people that emanate from the indigenous communities across this continent, we are reminded of the colonization that began over 500 years ago with Columbus's arrival to this hemisphere. And so this is what we write in this handbook. What came to be known as the conquest of the Americas is a necessary touchstone for understanding the education of Latino youth historically. Renowned Native American poet Simón Ortiz, in a book titled Growing Up Native American, speaks to his own experiences that unfortunately continue to resonate with the experiences of so many children today. And so I'm quoting Simón Ortiz. I felt an unspoken anxiety and resentment against unseen forces that determined our destiny to be un-Indian, embarrassed and uncomfortable with our grandparents' customs and strictly held values. We were to set our goals as American working men and women, single-mindedly industrious, patriotic, and unquestioning, building for a future which ensured that the U.S. was the greatest nation in the world. I felt fearfully uneasy with this, for by that I felt the loneliness, alienation, and isolation imposed on me by the separation from my family, home, and community. Although Ortiz, a Pueblo Indian, literally had to leave home and family in the 1950s to attend boarding school in Santa Fe and then in Albuquerque, every day in America, children today are still required to, quote, leave home, albeit symbolically, because of the culturally chauvinist curriculum to which they are routinely subjected, and most typically by teachers and school systems that systematically fail to construct a meaningful educational practice out of students' languages, cultures, community-based identities, or real-world experiences. Hence, we witness alienation and disaffection today from schooling for so many U.S. minority youth, an experience that gets frequently matched by the alienation of their teachers of color. Because of this ongoing tawdry history of colonization and Americanization, the schooling of Latino children and youth, and children of color generally, is characteristically vexed. Their folk model of education, or educación, which calls upon them to live in the world not as vessels to be filled with knowledge or as objects in need of remaking, but rather as social, caring, and respectful human beings, observing and honoring the dignity of others. That is invisible for so many of our children in our schools. In this same volume, UC Davis scholar Dr. Inés Hernández reflects on Simón Ortiz's contribution, and she offers the following. I would venture to say that he and all the rest of us who have survived have called on every ounce of our originality to give us the strength and inspiration for what Ortiz calls our fight back. This originality is found in the original cultural teachings that honor our humanity, our dignity, and our spirits as necessary components of our identity. Instructions for the future for the next 50 years are implied in what I have just quoted. It's not just knowledge and skills, but it's also a shared sense of fate with those that are othered and those that are other people's children's for vast segments of people, including teachers in our society, unfortunately. And we should care about them not just because they are our taxpayer base, although that's very important. That's very, very important. It should be a motivation. But they're not just a taxpayer base, right? There's deeper questions and concerns about the ways in which they are systematically being deprived of their humanity, their cultures, their spirits, dignity, and indeed their very lives by institutions like the police. Justice for Michael Brown. Yes, justice for Michael Brown. This week I heard someone say, and I hadn't heard this before, the school to prison pipeline, yes, but now I've heard the school to death pipeline. I teach this course on race and ethnicity in the schools, and I taught it last night. Last night, I mentioned to the students that a year prior to this one, it was Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was the big story, and I entered the classroom with that consciousness and that awareness, and now it's Michael Brown. And we need justice for him and his family. So referring to what Simón Ortiz calls our fight back, we in NLERAP, the National Latino Education Research and Policy Project, in NLERAP, what we seek to cultivate is also that fight back in the next generation of critically conscious teachers. But this work begins with the teachers or pre-service teachers themselves. Unfortunately, so much of today's focus on developing teachers' knowledge and skills manages to miss the mark. Among other things, it reinstantiates the Cartesian mind-body split that exists in Western culture. We're not just a mind and a body, right? We're spirit. It's just not, we should not be split in these ways. And we should focus more on our bodies as well and connect mind, body, and spirit together in our teaching and in our instruction. That is what Inés Hernández and Simón Ortiz are referring to when they're talking about that fight back. Because their spirits are oppressed. Their spirits are damaged. They're dispirited. Our children are dispirited in the public school system. They're dispirited in most of our school systems. You shouldn't have to get a university degree to get exposed to your own language, your own culture, your own history, to have any consciousness or awareness of the history of this continent. So the long-standing fetishizing of the mind sets us up for a conversation about education that privileges and valorizes individual merit and achievement, and that champions false notions of entitlement, and that promotes mental testing, and that endorses uninspiring educational reforms to narrow the achievement gap. This very discourse itself is toxic. Not that we shouldn't narrow the achievement gap, but the discourse about education itself does not inspire. It does not motivate. And it does not lend any clarity, little clarity, to directions that we should take in policy. What's that? And the achievement gap. Y'all remember Marshall McLuhan? The medium is the message, right? The medium is the message. And so we have to begin talking about children and schools in different ways, in ways that actually do not contribute to their dehumanizing, and that often are actually quite diversionary. They actually take us away from the deeper conversations that we should be having about race, culture, difference, power, and how these have enormous implications for the possibilities of children in our schools. At worst, this discourse robs students and ourselves of la buena educación, a virtuous education, precisely because it fails to build additively on students' capacities. That is, not subtracting their languages, cultures, and identities, but adding, expanding, elaborating. They come with us as fully formed human beings. They come from rich cultures. They come from backgrounds and histories that should be worthy of developing an educational focus and practice. And we should also come to appreciate in a very meaningful way in our classrooms how this situated historical understanding of minority youth, children that, frankly, are minorities. They're political, economic, cultural, and social minorities, and they belong to these communities that don't want this, that seek emancipation, an emancipatory approach to schooling. I do want to do a shout out to David Hinojosa and Team MALDEF, the MALDEF team. If you've kept up with the news, I'm very happy to say that if you haven't heard the news, that we've made some progress in the courts, in Judge Dietz courts, and that we have a challenge by Judge Dietz to address our school finance issues that are severe in the state of Texas. This will matriculate into policies this next session, and I hope that you're involved. I hope that you weigh in the Texas State Legislature on these issues. We need these resources in our schools. So I just spoke about the national level work that I'm involved in, and I'll speak now to some pretty awesome stuff that we're doing locally in Texas. And I mentioned at the beginning of my talk that it involves this Saturday Academy, this institution building that we're doing, but also some policy work that I'll get to shortly that does address high-stakes testing. So the first consists of this, we call it a Cultural Arts and Literacy Academy at the Emma S. Barrientos Mexican American Center. Has anyone been there? It's right on Town Lake. I know you have been, Cece, you've been there, but it's a beautiful site, and that is the outcome. Talk about roots and political identity. That is the outcome of 30 years of struggle. I mean, that the community, and that's a story unto itself, but that is the outcome of 30 years of struggle. And so now we have a beautiful site there, right on Town Lake, on the river. And what we're developing right now is a Saturday Academy for a cohort starting out with 35 fourth grade AISD children. And we're going to be teaching them Mexican American and Tejano history and culture. And it's important to focus on the fourth grade because this is when Texas history gets taught. We're scheduled to inaugurate this fall. We're crossing our fingers because we're waiting right now on City Council approval, a lot of signatures going up, but it is a partnership, and it's very official, legal kind of partnership, a contract with the Austin Independent School District, the Mexican American Cultural Center, and the City of Austin. And what we're doing is that we're building off the resources in our community, and we are developing a curriculum. The University of Texas is also involved, particularly Dr. Emilio Zamora and his students in the writing of this history. It's really amazing work in the writing of this history in a way that's consumable for teachers that then can develop curriculum around it. So there's important knowledge there in terms of how we make our work accessible. I've been part of conversations with historians or people that do history, and I think what's difficult is having that work reach broader audiences, right? I mean, we're real good about, in the academy generally, about talking to ourselves and talking to each other and presenting at conferences and making our work known to others that are similarly situated like ourselves. But we're not as good, unfortunately, at translating that work for school districts that can develop curriculum and that can make use of that knowledge. Emilio Zamora was able to do this under the auspices of the Tejano Monument Curriculum Initiative. And this was an initiative that led to the establishment of the Tejano Monument. If you haven't seen it, it's just beautiful. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's on the South Texas Capitol steps, and it was established on March 29th, 2012. And there was a grant that accompanied that effort that went into curriculum development. And so there is a website for that, and if you want it, I can get it to you, where some curriculum was developed. And what we're doing now, and we is this grassroots community called Nuestro Grupo, our group, literally our group, that is forming also this partnership. This past summer, the curriculum got taught to 100 children and their parents that participated in AISD's dual language summer school on 5 campuses. It was very, very well received. The focus is on civil rights, migration history, and local history, with the Tejano Monument being, for now, the part of the local history that has been most developed because of the Tejano Monument Curriculum Initiative. But it is the most developed part of the curriculum. And so when we visited, me and my assistant, we visited the schools at the end and saw their culminating projects. It was really inspiring to see the impact of that curriculum on these children. And it was mostly Anglo and Latino kids in these schools, 4th and 5th graders. And so the students, as part of the curriculum, they got to take a trip to the Texas State Capitol, the Capitol grounds, and in the south part they saw the Tejano Monument. How many people have seen the Tejano Monument? If you can raise your hand. Oh, you got to see it. It's so beautiful. And really, it's not a statue. It's a statuary. That's the technical term for it. It's a statuary because there's an explorador, an explorer, the vaquero, the cowboy. Then there's the family, and it's just a beautiful representation of the pre-colonial heritage of this state. It's a heritage that many draw their lines of descendancy to, and that is very much alive in terms of research that is being done in terms of the Tejano Genealogical Society gatherings that promote and develop this research, and then the historians like Dr. Zamora that are writing about it. So the kids, if you can think about it, this is their first time to the Texas State Capitol, right, like ever. And so they're small kids. And so they're in the 4th and 5th grade, and they get exposed. The first thing that they're exposed to is the Tejano Monument, and then they go to other parts of the Capitol grounds. And if you've been to the Capitol grounds, you'll see like a lot of soldiers and cannons and guns and horses, right, basically. But you won't see like a statuary aside from the Tejano Monument itself. And so it was real illuminating for the children to do that, to go there first, and then to the other parts of the Capitol grounds. And they started asking questions like, where's the women? You know, where's the children? Where's the family? It was such a contrast for them to start out with that image and then to go to the other parts of the Capitol grounds, and it's not to be seen elsewhere. And then they went inside the Capitol Rotunda, the Capitol itself, and they're looking at all the images on the wall and of the Rotunda, and they're walking through just the entire Capitol, getting a tour, and then they start asking, well, where's the the Latinos. And why are they all white? And these are small children, right? From the mouth of babes is such wisdom. And they're talking to each other, and the children are saying, gosh, there's no Mexicans here. Or, you know, there's a certain kind of a representation here. But certainly in the leadership, there are no Mexicans. And so then the other part of the curriculum is Mexicarte, which is this Mexican-American museum. It's awesome. It's really a great museum on Congress and 4th. And they went from there on Capitol grounds to Mexicarte, and they see this exhibit of the Latina woman. I mean, that's what's showing right now. And then they realized that they also didn't see any Latinas, any Latina women represented. And the children came back to Ridgetop Elementary saying, wow, to their principal, Mr. Gloria, saying, well, now we know why we're in dual language, not just because you're making us be in dual language, but because there's a history of Spanish in this country, in this state. There's a history. The children, according to Mr. Gloria, they talked to each other about their experiences, and he said that the Anglo children told the Mexican children that they felt sorry for them, that they felt really badly, that they weren't there, that their stories weren't there. So that was one experience. Then we went to another school, Becker Elementary, and it was really awesome. The children, again, this is our curriculum. This curriculum that we developed, okay? And so the students, on that day, the day that we got there, they held a mock demonstration in support of bilingual education. They had picket signs, and they held them up, and they walked around the school, and they were advocates, 4th graders, 5th graders. They're activists, they're advocates for bilingual education. It was so beautiful. It's so awe-inspiring to see this happening. That is the potential of a curriculum that is anchored in the soil, that is anchored in students' stories and their identities. That is the power of a curriculum. The students, according to the teachers and the principals in these schools, they wanted to also speak more Spanish, and that's the idea of a dual language program. We want to promote the Spanish language, the target language, in a naturalistic environment and setting, and they wanted to do that. Fate, you know, we were very, very successful. I'm very happy about that. You know, we don't have to pursue this monolingual, monocultural, monochromatic path. It gives me goosebumps to think about it. I remember when I was here at Rice University, I had an office in Sewell Hall. In Sewell Hall, I would come and work on Saturdays a lot, right? Workaholic. And what I noticed, and what we noticed, and Amelia and I, my husband, noticed, was that there were children, I don't know if they're still doing this, but there were Chinese children coming out of classrooms on Saturday. And finally we inquired, and we found out that these children were receiving Saturday school. They were learning Mandarin. They were learning their culture, their history. They were holding on to their languages. Is that still happening? Maybe they moved to another site. But we looked upon them with great envy. We had small children, we had babies, and we had the idea of developing a Saturday academy. We had that idea, and we had it even before we saw this played out in the flesh here at Rice University. But we were really envious, and it had always been a dream for us to do this work. So this partnership approach that we have with the district, the city of Austin, Nuestro Grupo, the University of Texas, is really a really dense field. There's a lot of players in this field. I mentioned the dominant ones. But there's a lot of goodwill. There's a lot of goodwill here. And there's awesome resources when we come together, when we're able to do that. And when we commit, and when we commit to a model that is progressive and rooted in the stories of children's communities and lives. I do want to thank the Chief Academic Officer, Pauline Dow, Dr. Dow, for her leadership. You also need good leadership. You need people with vision who can see into the future, right? It's not just enough to talk about diversity. We also have to make it actionable, make our work actionable. It can't be an accessory, right? We have to make it actionable and meaningful in ways that make a difference in students' lives. What I find humbling and interesting is that, I mean, I've worked so long in policy, and I'll get to that in a little bit. I worked a long time in policy, working on legislation, working on different kinds of agendas, weighing in on legislation at the Texas State Capitol. And what's really humbling is that what we've accomplished in Austin locally, without a policy, is amazing. Because of the curriculum writers cadre within the Austin Independent School District and Dr. Pauline Dow and her leadership in that arena, this curriculum that we have, and we've expanded on it. We've had professional development opportunities for teachers, and we want to do more. But we've had professional development and also for curriculum writers. It's been a very interactive process. We've worked closely with them, so it's not an abstraction in terms of like who's writing it and trying to digest it on the other end for the district. But what we've accomplished is a curriculum that now is getting taught right now in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 11 in the Austin Independent School District. That's systemic change, right? So that's what's humbling, is that you know, for someone that's been involved in policy for so long, this would never have been accomplished with a policy edict. Thou shalt teach ethnic studies, right? I mean, where would that have gotten us, right? Thou shalt do that. So there's important detail here, and I hope that this encourages those of you in the audience to think about how to move the needle forward on curriculum. And curriculum is so important because it really is the heart and soul of education, and we know that education is about the reproduction of consciousness, right? And so in its absence, we have a curriculum that, unfortunately, so many of the times, instead of liberating, it domesticates. So we're very excited about this work, and we're harnessing the momentum throughout the state in what has been a decades-long struggle, struggles that are deeply rooted in our organizations, a decades-long struggle for improving the literacy of our communities through inclusive, culturally relevant curricula. Well, I have no doubt. Pardon me? For deaf kids? No. You talked about high school now becoming school to deaf, not yeah. Well, it was just a metaphor. Yeah, it was a metaphor. Yeah, but I mean, you were talking about the elementary school kids and what they were doing. What about in high school? What about in that 11th grade? Well, 11th grade is also where Texas history gets taught. I understand. And so that's why we also, actually it was a district that took that on. We just provided them a curriculum that was more or less oriented toward the 5th and the 4th grades at that level. And what they did was they extended it beyond. It's really beautiful professional curriculum with scopes and sequence and with you know, it's tied to TEKS. It's TEKS aligned. It's tied to the vision of the district itself in terms of global literacies. So that's really all I can say about that. But definitely this is something that we need to understand more. It's just been such a nice collective effort, and it's so beautiful for the district to assume ownership on this. So while I have no doubt in my mind, no question, that this is the direction that we have to go as an antidote to the loneliness, alienation, and isolation about which Simon Ortiz, Freire, myself, and others have spoken and have written, all of this is for naught if by the 10th week of school we have to focus on tests, right? I mean, it is. It gets undermined by the weight of the testing system, unfortunately, that we have in place. And everything else as well that is enriching and fun. It has to get pushed aside, unfortunately, because of a need to focus on the needs of the system, right? So clearly, our testing system works at cross purposes with what we are trying to accomplish in our district. So our work is never that simple. Not only do we have to be reimagining education, but we also need to tackle the policies and practices that get in the way of what we're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to speak now to the other work that I'm involved in that involves different groups as well. It involves Education Austin. I've mentioned Nuestro Grupo. And Education Austin is the TFA-NEA affiliate on the ground level, and ISD, and the Austin Independent School District. So from 2009 to the present, TCEP has led the state in working toward a more fair, TCEP is the center that I direct, the Texas Center for Education Policy at UT. We have been leading the state in working toward a more fair and valid assessment system where poor standardized test scores can be compensated for by measures on other factors in the determination of high-stakes decisions, and I mentioned this earlier, like promotion, retention, graduation, or non-graduation. And there are champions in this room. I'm very, very pleased and happy to have State Representative Dora Olivo, who has been our champion on high-stakes testing in the Texas State Legislature for many sessions, And she's also on the board of the Texas Center for Education Policy. And so you'll be happy to hear what I have to share. And of course, Dr. Linda McNeil, and there's others who are not present that were part of the court case, the federal court case in Judge Prado's court in 1999, 2000, a ruling in 2000. So what happened in 2009, as you know, Representative, because of our collective efforts over time, and because No Child Left Behind helped everywhere else in the nation become Texas, and that resulted in the research base, because ours wasn't enough, right, Linda? Ours wasn't sufficient to make a difference, or much of a difference at a time among many of our leadership. Because of that, we were able to pass benchmark legislation. We were able to eliminate high-stakes testing for third graders in the state of Texas in 2009, positively affecting 300,000 children in the 2010 academic year. That deserves an applause. Pardon me? And we're still retaining them. That's right. Our work is not finished. Our work is not finished. But we're on it, okay? We're on it. And so here's what we're trying to accomplish right now. And it's again, it's different groups in the Austin Independent School District. Everyone's around the table. You know, we're talking about building off the momentum that exists right now, that exists among many of our superintendents. You've seen the 80 to 85% resolutions across the state that are against high-stakes testing. Perhaps you learned about House Bill 2824 that was filed last session, or maybe you heard about Senate Bill 1556 from the previous session that created the Visioning Institute that resulted in superintendents gathering to talk about the development of a new assessment system. A new system that would, for those districts that are part of their consortium, the 23 districts, according to House Bill 2824, would be alleviated from having to administer high-stakes tests. So that's interesting, right? So this was a bill that made it to the governor's desk. It came out, that's a big deal. It came out of the House, it came out of the Senate, and it made it to the governor's desk. Governor Perry vetoed it. And I know why he vetoed it. And he vetoed it, and right when he was about to sign, there was an editorial that came out in the paper that said he should not sign it, because if he signs it, it will be the beginning of the undoing of the testing system as we know it. my friends, that bill's going to get refiled again. And so we need to be mindful of these districts associated with the Visioning Institute. So there is momentum in the state of Texas. So regardless of what we do or not do, because of that momentum, that bill with the new governor, we're not going to have Governor Perry next, right? With a new governor, might actually become state law, okay? So hold that thought. What I've been a part of for a long time with the Austin Independent School District, going back to 2003, is the development of a locally based assessment system that would also alleviate high-stakes tests. So if you fast forward to the present, that's evolved into an agenda, a local agenda that would involve legislation that would, if it passes, eliminate high-stakes testing for a consortium of schools within the district. House Bill 2824 would alleviate high-stakes testing for a consortium of districts. This is not that. This is an alleviation from the tests for select schools within the Austin Independent School District. But you just can't eliminate the tests, right? You also have to like do something that is research-based and that is an alternative. And so what we're doing is, and I'm working with my students, we're doing the research. I took a trip with Pauline Dow and another high-level staff person to New York. We're studying the New York Standards performance schools in New York. If you know Debbie Meyer and her work, that consortium is a consortium of schools that has never admitted, I mean, hardly any high-stakes tests. They do have one Regents exam that these consortium schools have to test kids in. But aside from that, they have a project-based assessment system. They administer PBATs, performance-based assessment tests. And each PBAT aligns to critical areas that are required by the state for a high school diploma: English, science, math, social studies. And these are very rigorous tests that students have to take. They're performance-based assessment. You have to defend your work before a committee, right? And the committees that they have in the schools that we observed in a trip about 2 months ago to New York was comprised of principals, right? It was comprised of principals. So this is really exciting what we're looking at right now. Kentucky is also looking at moving towards this kind of system with similar kinds of legislation as well. And they have a long history in portfolio-based assessment. And this is an approach to assessment that is not an event, right? It's a process. It's a verb. It's ongoing. It's daily. So to move in this direction, there's a lot that has to be done. You just can't eliminate the tests, and you just can't have performance-based assessments. There needs to be professional development. We need to learn. I mean, almost, reimagine again a new system that is authentic and is connected to students' lives and to their stories, like I've been talking about. So we draw a lot of inspiration from our colleagues in New York, and we hope to have legislation that, if it gets signed by our next governor, if we prevail, again, building off the momentum of the districts that are also seeking relief. But if we prevail, then the idea would be for the Commissioner of Education to seek a waiver from No Child Left Behind testing requirements so that we can implement this performance-based assessment system in the Austin Independent School District. So it's really awesome. So to conclude and restate what the next 50 years should look like, I ask you to look closely at what critical scholars are advocating for. We seek an emancipatory approach to education. We aim to nurture a capacity for renewal, not only for the students in our classrooms, but also for ourselves, our children, and our communities. Ours is an intergenerational perspective of knowledge and activism that is lodged in a sense of history, past, present, and future. Inez Hernandez, I'll quote her again, just as such a brilliant, great scholar and writer. She expresses this idea well. Quote, "I've heard many elders say that we that walk the earth now are the link between our ancestors and our unborn generations. The past and the future come together in us. In this view, the burden of the current generation is to not simply anticipate the life chances of the next, but to actually shape it through the passing down of a way of being and knowing in the world as a critical educator with the requisite capacities enhanced by the gift of their own personal histories and stories, so that they and their families and communities may achieve stable, fulfilling, and rewarding futures." Thank you very much.